This is a clove tree. Now, cloves that we use in cooking are the dried flowers that come from this tree. The plant originated on some incredibly small volcanic islands called the Moluccas, and centuries ago, thousands of people lost their lives fighting over the little thing because it was more valuable than gold. Imbued with magical properties, sought after for medicines and aphrodisiacs, with the power to build empires and destroy lives. This is the story of spice.
I'm Merrilies Parker, and I'm going on a voyage around the world with my chef friends Padma Lakshmi, who is in India and Spain, Tyler Florence, who is in Mexico.
You may find the following scenes disturbing.
And Peter Gordon, who is in China.
It's pretty pungent stuff, this.
Between us, we explore the colourful past of spices and how they have changed the way we eat today. We follow the journey spices made from China over the Silk Route to the Middle East, and from the Spice Islands through the spice ports of Malacca, Sri Lanka and Kerala via Arabia to Europe. And from Central America to Spain, and from there around the rest of the world. Spices can be the bark, root, bud, seed or fruit of a plant. They can be used whole and fresh, dried, or most commonly pounded into a powder. The word spice comes from an old French word meaning special. Spices came from lands at the edge of the world. Many people in the ancient world believed spices came from paradise. The Egyptians mummified their dead with cumin. The Chinese burnt cloves to commune with the spirit world. And some medieval Europeans believed nutmeg was the only cure for the plague.
Pepper was so valuable, it was used instead of money, and it was pepper that the Romans were so mad about.
I'm in the Roman ruins of Baalbek, situated 50 miles east of Beirut in Lebanon.
Here in Baalbek once stood the most impressive temples outside of Rome. They took 10,000 slaves over 200 years to build. I have to say, this place is totally overwhelming. Was the Temple of Jupiter, and if I can get up here, you can get the picture of what an extraordinary piece of engineering this was. And though only 6 columns remain, they've survived centuries of war and earthquake, and each one is 20 meters tall, and I feel absolutely tiny.
Baalbek is situated in present-day Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley. Traders brought their wares from Egypt in the south, through Baalbek and up through Turkey, and then on to Rome. Baalbek has been an important holy place for thousands of years. Under the Phoenicians, it was the scene of human sacrifice and temple prostitution. The Romans added to the Phoenician city, building Baalbek on an extravagant scale, unlike anything in Rome. At its height, Baalbek housed 250,000 people. From time immemorial, traveller merchants trod ancient routes trading spices. They made up fabulous tales to boost their value to a public eager for novelty. Ambergris was said to be the spittle of dragons, and cinnamon was stolen from nests guarded by giant birds. Although the Romans weren't the first to use spices in their cooking, they were the first to use them in industrial quantities, and the one they were mad for was pepper.
This is pepper. Rome was ransomed for it, people were murdered over it, and I bet you didn't think about that last time you twisted a bit over your pizza.
Black pepper only grew on the Malabar or west coast of India, a 5,000-mile journey to the tables of Rome. The spice capital of the Malabar coast is Cochin in Kerala. It's still today a vibrant port where all sorts of spices are grown and sold. Padma Lakshmi is there to find out more.
It's the combination of Kerala's climate, hills, and soil that yield the biggest quantity and some of the best spices in the world.
Black pepper is the king of spices here. It's also known as black gold. Ara kilo black pepper tango? Not only was it a prosperous commodity, but it used to be given as a treasured gift to visiting dignitaries.
From Rome to the west coast of India was a 3-year round-trip boat ride. But during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, sailors discovered they could use the monsoon winds both there and back and make the trip in a year. So even more precious pepper poured into Rome. I'm at Butser ancient farm in England, where besides Iron Age houses, they've also rebuilt an authentic Roman villa. In the world's oldest cookbook, the Roman cook Apicius uses black pepper in at least 2/3 of his recipes. Sally Granger shows me a pork recipe using the Romans' favourite spice.
The smell of freshly ground pepper on hot food, as you know, is glorious. It was important in every dish. Every dish that in the cookery book that survives says finished with black pepper.
They're
freshly ground.
obsessed with the
Obsessed
black
with
pepper.
black pepper.
Straight away, I run into a spice I've never seen before. What are they?
Now, these are wonderful. This is a bayberry. The laurel leaf, the bay leaf. That
Well, as in the laurel leaf that they wore on their head?
Exactly, yes.
Bay's a very strong flavour.
You smell it. It has the aroma of bay leaf. Technically, you can't eat a bay leaf, of course.
No, you just
add flavours.
infuse.
Exactly. This you can actually put into the food.
We also add local Mediterranean spices, lovage, dill, cumin and coriander.
The final one is something called isa fetida. You've heard of it?
Yes, I use this great dal. And
This
it
is-
stinks.
It stinks. It's isa as in resin and fetida as in fetid.
And
which
they,
means
in India, see again, this is an Indian spice, isn't it? This
certainly
originated...
is. Well, it actually originated in Afghanistan. That was where it first was grown. Its meat tenderising qualities are paramount.
What Sally is cooking is the first recorded example of finger food.
You cut it into dice, but you leave it on the skin, and the fat keeps the meat moist. So you have these little cubes of meat, and when it's roasted, they can be pulled off.
And there's one more surprise for me.
We need to add the magic ingredient, Roman fish sauce. Liquamen, it's called.
Fantastic. And I thought fish sauce was Asian.
Well, yes, but the Romans and the Greeks, in fact, the Greeks first invented fish sauce. They developed the idea of taking anchovy, small anchovy, and mixing it with salt and allowing them to dissolve and ferment. It should be a tablespoon, but we don't have one because the Romans didn't have tablespoons. Give that a stir for me.
So that's our marinade for the meat. Okay. Just pour it like that.
Yeah, all over. You get a hand.
Apicius tells us that we should now leave the meat to marinate for 3 days. Gosh, it must have been quite interesting by the end of the 3 days.
Yes, I think so.
This is the kind of oven a well-off Roman would have taken with him on his travels. Sally puts the coals on the top of the oven, creating even all-round heat. While the meat is cooking, we make a sauce out of pepper, lovage, sweet wine and fish sauce.
Whoa!
40 minutes later, the lid comes off.
Oh, wow, look at that.
I think we can safely say we're done. We're a little bit toasty.
It smells awesome. Oh. It's good, isn't it? It's like ribs or something. You just want to lick your fingers.
Beautiful.
Thank you so much. It's delicious.
At the other side of the known world, the Chinese were also going nuts for spices.
When the Romans and their ambassadors arrived in India, they heard Chinese being spoken, and that was because the Chinese had been trading in spice as early as 200 BC. Now that's 1,000 years earlier than any European had even set foot on the Spice Islands.
From China, merchants had for centuries used overland routes to Persia, routes that became known as the Silk Routes. But now the Chinese were discovering the Indonesian islands to their south. My friend Peter Gordon travels to remote South China, where the Yao tribe have used imported cloves in their cooking for centuries.
Spices play a key role in Cantonese cooking. The Yao have always been farmers, and their indigenous produce has influenced their recipes. And one of the most vital ingredients grows here in northwest Guangdong. These are star anise trees, and the star-shaped pod has an intense, aromatic and slightly sweet flavour. According to Chinese medicine, it's good for coughs, stomachache and breath freshening. And of course, it's also an essential ingredient in 5-spice powder.
The recipe for a traditional 5-spice powder is equal quantities of indigenous Szechuan pepper, cassia or Chinese cinnamon and star anise, along with fennel seeds originating in the Mediterranean and cloves from the islands to the south.
It's pretty pungent stuff, this, and when you're cooking with it, a little goes a long way, so you don't need to use too much, and it does keep for a while.
Peter meets Sun Mai, who still cooks in the traditional way.
Okay, what are we going to do?
Now first you have to chop the chili, some ginger.
Okay, and this garlic, I've never seen this before. It's like 1 clove of garlic is the whole head. That's wonderful.
Yes, we only use it for cooking pork.
Oh, perfect for this dish then.
While the Romans spiced their pork with black pepper and Mediterranean aromatics, in China they cooked the same basic dish using the spices of the Far East, making for a completely different taste. In Sun Mai's kitchen, they cook the pork in a sauce made of sugar, ginger and chilies.
Now you need to add some water, soy sauce and rice wine.
They add some shiitake mushrooms and dried plums. Then leave it to cook for an hour and a half.
Oh, it smells delicious.
Yes. Delicious, yes? It's even better with boiled rice.
The ingredients from dishes like this show that spices had been flowing to and fro between China and Europe for ages, and that was thanks to some powerful middlemen. Were mad about spices, but where spices came from, Christians feared to tread, so they used the Arabs as middlemen. Cities like Byzantium, Alexandria, Cairo and Tripoli here in Lebanon became immensely wealthy on the back of the spice trade. Arabs took control of all the key spice ports of the Mediterranean as Islam spread from Arabia west towards Morocco and east to the Malabar coast in India. Now I'm here at a caravanserai, which is kind of like a camel motel where over 1,000 years ago camels laden with spices would come to rest after their long and incredibly hard journeys across the Arabian deserts. Later, restaurateur Nazi shows me the spices I need for traditional Lebanese cooking. I can see cumin, spied it here.
Smell it.
Can I have a smell?
Huh? Camon. I can taste it myself.
Yeah, I love it.
Nice, too fresh.
It's great. Cumin has a sweet aroma with a mildly bitter taste. It's native to the eastern Mediterranean and has been used for over 5,000 years. It was thought in medieval Europe to encourage faithfulness. Is there anything that you think I shouldn't leave Lebanon without?
I think
Any
there's
spice?
another thing, something traditional thing here. They use the sumac.
Sumac. Can I try some sumac?
100 gram sumac.
And is sumac a mixture of spices?
It's kind of a tree, exactly, you know.
It's a tree, it's actually a spice itself. Naz tells me that sumac is used widely in Lebanese, Iranian and Turkish cuisines. The Romans used sumac as a souring agent, in the same way we would use lemon juice.
I'm going to be spiced out. It's perfect.
You need toothpaste when you travel home.
Naz introduces me to another delight of Lebanese life, cardamom-flavoured coffee.
Wow. Taste of cardamom is it's quite strong. That's going to pick you up for me. It's going to pick you up in the morning.
Cardamom is part of the ginger family and grows in southern India. Hand-picking is essential so as not to damage the pods, which is why cardamom is one of the most expensive of all spices. Arab traders became addicted to cardamom coffee, known as galwa. Good manners dictate that you drink at least 3 cups, which gets me out of my seat. Back on the spice trail, I visit the Bekaa Valley, peaceful at the time of my visit, now politically volatile. I have come to find out about a spice-laden meal which sums up Middle Eastern hospitality. Anissa Helou introduces me to 2 staples of meze, which are Middle Eastern appetizers. First up, tabbouleh, a salad made of Bulgar wheat, parsley and tomatoes. It's found all over the Middle East, but the Lebanese version is special.
In Lebanon, they use spices in it. It has cinnamon, 7-spice mixture, pepper. And you know the thing about cinnamon? In the old days, it used to be considered an aphrodisiac. And in the harem...
Tomatoes were only added to the recipe when the Spaniards introduced them in the 16th century to Europe and the Old World.
And this is always in tabbouleh, isn't it, tomato?
Always. And not peeled, not seeded, nothing. You know, you use the whole thing. Well, also because you want it to crunch and you don't want it to be too soft.
We throw in the Bulgar wheat, but just a handful.
Aphrodisiac.
The cinnamon.
And quite a bit. The 7-spice mixture. Now, this is a very interesting mixture. It's 7 spices. We use it in a lot of different things in Lebanon.
The 7-spice mix includes black and white pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger and sumac.
Oh, can I help? I'll go around the outside.
Here, let me do this side and then...
Anissa also shows me how to make the classic dish hummus, which we garnish with paprika.
Just looks like a picture,
That's
you know.
it. Now, the Turks do hummus slightly differently. And what they do is that they season the hummus with cumin and paprika. And so the hummus is a little bit less creamy in color, a bit darker, and spicier, not hot spicier, but tastier.
Another spice native to the Eastern Mediterranean is saffron. The Arabs took it west with the spread of Islam into Moorish Spain, where 70% of the saffron now grows. Padma goes to Spain to tilt at windmills.
The region of La Mancha is best known for Don Quixote and those famous windmills, but it's also the place where Spain's precious crop of saffron is harvested. Saffron comes from the delicate crocus flower which blooms for only a few weeks a year. The fragile red stamen inside the flower must immediately be hand-picked. This painstaking labor is celebrated at the World Championship of Saffron Picking. It takes about 200 flowers to yield 1 single gram, which is why saffron is so expensive.
Down on the coast in Neha at Io's place, Padma finds out just why the Spaniards go to so much trouble for saffron. The answer is paella, and Io is the master of this iconic Spanish dish.
And this is the most important part, saffron. This is what separates a mediocre paella from an authentic Spanish paella. And we're going to add it to the middle of the pot. Now we're putting in tomatoes. They've been peeled. At this point, we're going to add some green peppers.
Io adds a Spanish short grain rice called bomba, and his secret ingredient is his tasty stock made from chicken, seafood and locally grown vegetables. It's hard to imagine paella without the distinctive taste and even colour that saffron, a spice from the East, gives this classic Spanish dish.
Buenísimo.
Around 1,000 years ago, a tiny nation-state formed an unlikely bond with their former arch-enemies. The Arabs were key players in the spice trade for centuries, but when they joined forces with Venice, the modern era for spices was born.
The Crusaders arrived in boats belonging to the Venetians, who acted as bodyguards and taxi drivers, and once here, the Venetians lost no time in doing a spot of trading.
Venice joined forces with Egypt, and the Egyptians protected the Venetian fleets as they sailed from Cairo to Venice.
By the end of the 12th century, thanks to spice, Venice was the richest state in the world.
The risks may have been great, but the profits were colossal. The likes of Venice's extravagant wealth was unseen before in the Western world and spelled an end to the Dark Ages in Europe.
The Venetians transported spices over the Alps to the tables of the rich northern Europeans. In those days, 1 pound of ginger was worth the equivalent of 1 sheep, and 1 pound of mace the equivalent of 3 sheep or 1 cow. Even then, the medieval palate was very sophisticated in its taste for spice.
Hampton Court Palace in England was in its day the grandest, most sophisticated palace in Europe. Henry VIII was the gourmet king, and the cooks in his kitchens often cooked up feasts for 600 people. In the kitchens of Hampton Court, I am introduced to some spices I've never heard of by food archaeologist Richard Fitch.
This one here?
Those are grains of paradise. They're also called the Malagueta pepper, the alligator pepper, or the Guinea pepper. They all come, all the same name for a pepper that comes from the Guinea coast, from West Africa. Grains of paradise are distinctly feisty.
This I don't recognise here. What's this one?
That, which looks like juniper berries, they are in fact cubebs, also called the Javan-tailed pepper. It's not a true pepper, it's a berry, dried berry, but it has a peppery taste.
Grown mostly in the wild in Sri Lanka and Indonesia, cubebs are the dried, unripe fruits of a member of the vine family. Richard shows me how to make beef stewed.
Well, we need to cut it up into small, what they call gobbets, or mouth-sized pieces.
That's brilliant.
The whole point,
you almost know what that means just by that.
That's exactly what it says. You've got to cut it up. The idea is to make it easy to eat.
The 15th century recipe beef stewed basically just means stewed beef in Middle English. Then come the spices.
Grains of paradise. That's mace. Which we put some of that in. That's the cassia bark. The long pepper. And a pinch of cloves.
He adds a huge amount of diced onions to the pot and some finely chopped parsley and sage. We leave it to cook for 4 hours. This slow reduction of the sauce was designed to blend the flavours and tenderise the meat.
I mean, it smells amazing. The colour's quite kind of dull.
Yeah, it's the trouble with what we like to call history food, that until you get all of the ingredients from America, like the tomato and corn and so on, it's beigey, browny, muddy coloured. But fortunately, we don't taste with our eyes, we taste with our mouths.
Exactly. Can I taste? Wow. I really thought I wasn't going to like that, and it is absolutely delicious. There are so many flavours in there that are kind of familiar, but they're like a distant cousin. You know, I can taste pepper, but it's so much more sort of perfumed.
If you get the balance right, it stops being spicy and becomes spiced, and that's the aim.
At the end of the 15th century, Venice still dominated the European spice trade, But a power over on the western edge of Europe wanted a piece of the action.
The Portuguese grew tired of the Venetian stranglehold. They poured money into alternative ways to get to spice. After thousands of lost lives, they clinched it. They devised a ship that could sail upwind, which meant it could go round the southern tip of Africa. The race for spice was on.
The Portuguese were the fiercest pursuers of spices because Lisbon lay at the far end of the old trade routes, so for them spices were really expensive. But in the 16th century, Lisbon became the opulent centre of a vast empire after Da Gama discovered the sea route to India. India's keynote dish, the biryani, makes use of many of the spices which brought the Portuguese to India. But many more spices are from the far ends of the spice trails. Can you guess which are native to India? Padma is on the case.
Master Chef Mehboob Alam Khan invited me to his home to cook his specialty, the biryani.
Please give me that ginger garlic paste.
Garlic and ginger.
Now this is a common ingredient for most of the Indian cooking, you know. You also give me some turmeric.
Where did you learn to make this biryani?
Oh, at my house, from my mother. Give me the red chilies, some cinnamon stick, elaichi, cardamom.
And you leave the shell on.
Now give me some onions.
These have been fried, correct?
This is fried, crisp fried onions, you see. And now you see I crush them with my hand. Now give me the lemon juice that is there. Mint, coriander, green chilies, all chopped together.
Okay.
Now this is our basic marinade, you see. Now we will be adding a little of refined peanut oil.
Mehboob leaves the sumptuous mixture to marinate for 45 minutes. Then he adds the rice.
And what's this?
Now this is saffron, boiled along with milk.
Whole milk.
In a pot sealed with pastry, it's left to cook for 40 minutes. Did you guess which of all those spices came from India? Well, it was cinnamon, cardamom, and turmeric, which are native to India. The others are from Europe, South America, China, and South Asia.
How it tastes?
Very tasty. That's really delicious.
Excellent. Nothing to compare with the biryani, I say.
Nothing to compare.
Indian spices were all very well, but the Portuguese thirst for spices seemed unquenchable. From the Indian ports, the Portuguese moved to Malaysia, where they captured the port of Malacca, a bottleneck through which all ships had to pass en route from China to India. Malacca was a huge prize, the richest port in Asia. By the time the Portuguese arrived in 1511, Malacca was already a wealthy centre of trade for the Chinese, the Indians, the Thais, and the Indonesians. It was also a jumping-off point to the Spice Islands to the east. As one medieval chronicler put it, whoever is the Lord of Malacca has his hand on the throat of Venice. In Malacca today, you can still see the influence of the Portuguese in a number of their traditional dishes. Steamed and dry-fried sambal crab, green cancon tossed in blanchan, a spicy prawn paste, and Portuguese-style prawns, spicy fish baked in banana leaves, and the classic curry de bal, or devil's curry. All these dishes blend elements of Portugal and its former colonies in Africa, Goa, and here in Malacca. Rice, of course. Oh my goodness, look at that crab. The Portuguese had sewn up all the most valuable Asian ports, but they had a rival, the Spanish. And while the Portuguese had gone east, the Spanish headed west. Christopher Columbus tried to pass off the seeds of this tree, the allspice, as pepper because he was under huge pressure from his sponsor, the King of Spain. And although it does have hints of pepper, it also smells a little bit like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, which, although delicious, is not quite the same thing. Christopher Columbus sailed from Europe in search of spices in 1492. But when he landed in Central America, he discovered a whole new world of tastes. Tyler Florence is in Mexico to try them.
When the Spanish first set foot in Mexico in the 16th century, one of the world's greatest culinary adventures began. Mexico became the major gateway between Europe and the Americas, with each culture swapping indigenous foods and cooking ideas. The Spanish were amazed to find a whole host of new fruits and vegetables they'd never even seen before, never mind tasted. In fact, a lot of our favorite foods actually originated in Mexico.
Europe had no idea what a tomato was until the 16th century. And when Spain started colonizing the New World, they discovered that Mexico was a major player in the culinary scene. And things they've given to the New World is a list you probably take for granted on a day-to-day basis. I mean, things like vanilla, chocolate, pineapple, chilies, avocados, beans, green beans. It goes on and on. Imagine cooking without this little guy. Viva Mexico.
But probably the greatest gift to the world's spice palette was the chili pepper. Tyler meets up with Patricia Quintana, one of Mexico's top chefs.
You know, Mexican cooking wouldn't have the same fiery soul without the chili. There are 300 varieties of fresh chilies that grow here and many more dried. And today, we're here with one of the matriarchs of Mexican cooking, Patricia Quintana, and she's going to walk us through this whole chili thing. What do you have today?
Chiles poblanos.
Those are beautiful.
Well, the poblano is a staple to Mexican cuisine, and it grows, you know, all year round.
And so they're very accessible, and it's also, like, guys, check this out. This is really beautiful. The poblano has a large cavity inside, so they're really great for stuffing inside. You can pretty much stuff anything, beans and cheese.
And seafood and goat cheese.
But you have to get these little guys out, these little spicy devils. That's what the heat is, right there.
The poblano is one of the milder chilies you'll find in Mexico. The general rule is, the smaller the chili, the hotter the flavor.
Well, what Patricia has just been explaining to me, that chilies are measured for heat on a scale called Scoville units. Basically, it's a number system that describes how hot a chili really is compared to other chilies. And if you think about sort of a Richter scale of seismic activity, but on your tongue, let me give you an example here. Let's just say a lonely jalapeno rates about 2,300 on a Richter scale, which is pretty hot, right? Very hot. But the daddy, the king daddy of all chilies, the habanero, 300,000.
Tyler heads to the state of Veracruz, where vanilla's grown.
Mexico is the birthplace of vanilla. It was the Totonacs, a local indigenous tribe, who discovered the orchid that produces the vanilla pod. And to this day, at harvest time, they celebrate these prize pods in a very unique way.
Those mad flyers above me are known as voladores, and they are the native Totonac people of Veracruz. And they're kicking off a 7-day festival celebrating the vanilla bean. Look at that.
3 times a day for the week-long festival, the voladores take their life into their own hands, suspended from a twisting, falling rope for up to 15 minutes. The Totonacs developed the painstaking process of curing the vanilla pods, a secret they guarded for centuries.
Those little black flecks you find inside your vanilla ice cream are called vanilla beans, and they come from this guy, which is a whole vanilla pod. Now, vanilla is the second most expensive spice in the world behind saffron. As a matter of fact, this guy would probably go for about $10 in the States. They're about $1.50 here, so I'm definitely going to snag a few. But the sticky smell of this thing, it's like the best scoop of vanilla ice cream you ever had in your entire life, times 10.
Meanwhile, back in Malacca, the Dutch were closing in on the Portuguese. This is the entrance to the Malacca River, and it's hard to imagine that this tiny river mouth was the gateway to possibly one of the most important trading centres in history. It was actually here in these warehouses over 200 years ago that the Dutch East India Company would have been loading tons of spices onto ships to go back to Europe, and the air would have been heady with the smell of cinnamon, cloves and nutmeg. The Dutch stole the precious port of Malacca from the Portuguese, and from here they could access the 2 islands in the Moluccas to the southeast, which were home to the most valuable spices of all.
Like cloves, the fabulous fruit of the nutmeg was originally only found on the Moluccas, and possibly it was as valuable because it had 2 spices. The inside was nutmeg and the outside was mace. Now the outside here is the fruit and tastes delicious. The beautiful red outer skin when dried becomes mace, and then inside, the black bit, that's our nutmeg.
The islands of the Moluccas were hard won by the Dutch. The largest of them was only 10 miles wide, and finding them in the Indonesian archipelago of 16,000 islands without a map was like finding a needle in a haystack. The journeys were epic. The island coastlines were hazardous, and there was a huge risk of storms and shipwreck. Savage people were rumoured to live there. The Dutch protected their spice possessions aggressively and gained a monopoly on nutmeg and cloves by slaughtering the island's 6,000 natives. They kept prices artificially high by burning huge bonfires of nutmeg. Anyone caught trying to steal a nutmeg was immediately put to death. By the middle of the 17th century, Amsterdam was a new power in the world trade in spices. But in what could be the boldest act of industrial espionage, a single man was about to fatally undermine the Dutch monopoly. Mauritius, an island paradise in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It was here that one of the more bizarre chapters in the spice story was to be played out, when a well-named Frenchman took on the Dutch.
When the French first came here to colonise the island in 1721, they thought it would be a good idea to make Mauritius into a spice island and take away the monopoly that the Dutch had at that time. And Peter Poivre came here, Peter Pepper in English, came here, and he thought it would be a good money-making proposition to bring various spices, nutmeg, mace and cloves to the island, grow them here and make a lot of money.
Peter Pepper's move symbolically spelt the end of the Dutch era, but the French didn't get much of a look in where spices were concerned. There were other lone adventurers out there on the high seas, and a galleon was a floating fortune.
This is the Golden Hind, an exact replica of the boat Sir Francis Drake sailed around the world in 1577. After plundering Spanish galleons along the coast of America, Drake arrived in the Spice Islands of the Moluccas. He made a deal with the local sultan and left with 6 tons of cloves. When Drake arrived in England, his hold full of gold and spices, he was able to pay back his investors 47 times over. To the British, he was a hero. To the rest of the world, a pirate.
Drake's hugely successful trip led to the setting up of the British East India Company, whose aim was to exploit Asia's markets. The British gained the tiny spice island of Run in 1603, later swapping it for the then altogether less spicy island of New York.
Eventually they took hold of the Malaccan Straits and ended the Dutch stranglehold.
Just up the straits from Dutch Malacca, the British established their own base in Penang, and you can still see the British influence in these grand buildings in Georgetown, Penang's capital. In 1786, a Royal East India Company captain, Francis Light, made a deal with the local sultan and invited people from all across the British Empire to settle here. 2 main communities were established here and still thrive today: Chinatown and Little India. The local spice shops go back generations, and I'm going to meet journalist Himanshu Bhatt to find out more.
This is Mira Saib. My family has been shopping here for the last 30-40 years.
Obviously, some of these spices I recognise. I mean, like things like star anise and pepper and cloves. Would they all have been shipped in from India originally?
Originally from other places like the Moluccan Islands, Sri Lanka, Kerala in India.
It's a fantastic shop. I tell you, it smells just... I literally close my eyes and I could be in India, you know? It's fantastic.
Today, spices are very much part of the food of multicultural Malaysia, where amongst others, the Chinese, the Portuguese, the Dutch and the British have all stopped off. And now Malaysia is home to Asia's biggest spice farm, Nazuha, covering 300,000 acres with 100,000 plants. It exports its organic spices all over the world. I'm going to Langkawi to meet Shukri, the owner of the celebrated Lighthouse restaurant, to have a lesson in Malay cooking. One of Malaysia's modern-day dishes is reflective of its varied past as a spice trader's mecca.
And now we're going to make something very special.
Right.
What are we going to make?
It's a beef rendang.
Delicious.
The key dish includes pounded chili, onions and lemongrass.
Then galangal, ginger, then garlic. You need all the other spices.
Oh, star anise.
Star anise, yeah.
Cinnamon, cloves.
Cinnamon, cloves, flour.
Cardamom.
That's it, cardamom.
They're like the aromatics, aren't they?
That's right, you need all this for the aroma.
These are the real stars of this dish.
Oh! Oh, yeah, put that in.
Yeah. Yes, fantastic. Yeah, right.
Great.
Yeah. Now is the time for us to put our beef.
But there is one last magic ingredient, another great aromatic.
Turmeric leaves.
Oh, turmeric leaves. Obviously, I've seen turmeric. Does it smell like turmeric?
Yeah, it smells turmeric. The reason we use the leaf because the leaves have more aroma. All you have to do is just shred it into pieces, yeah.
We add kaffir lime leaves and coconut milk. The secret ingredient is pounded toasted coconut flesh called keriset.
It's really going to thicken it up even more. So it's supposed to be quite dry, isn't it?
Yeah, it's supposed to be dry.
I'm going to try. Can I have a sneak preview?
Please, yeah. I'll do the same. Let me try it.
The meat is meltingly tender. It's incredible how all the spices have blended into sort of really in-depth flavour. And the meat is just melting. Oh, fantastic.
By the end of the 19th century, the British had reached into all corners of the known world. For over 100 years, British traders have been bringing back plants to this place, Kew Gardens in London, home to the largest plant collections in the world. Here specimens could be checked and cross-checked, all 80,000 of them. Research which still continues today. The British planted spices everywhere. Black pepper in Singapore, nutmeg in Grenada, cinnamon in the Seychelles and ginger in Jamaica. Spices really had gone global. Once the monopolies were broken, spices became available to everyone. And now you can get almost any spice from any supermarket. But now we no longer have to steal spice from the nests of dragons. Has the spice gone out of spice? Right in my own neighbourhood, Notting Hill, London, I meet Birgit Erat, modern spice entrepreneur, to find out the state of spices today.
What's happened? What's happened to the spices?
Mass produced, they have cash crops. You know,
Right.
the demand now is so high on spices. They produce three crops a year on the same field. I mean, can you tell me what nutrients are left in that root of the cumin or the coriander or the cardamoms? Like in certain places, especially the mass-produced ones, they're allowed to take 33% of the volatile oils out of spices to use as flavorings in the food industry. And then they have to come in with chemicals to make that up again.
But do you think that there's, you know, because it's happened in other types of farming, is that people are now craving the real thing again? You know, people started to write about it, people like you opening shops.
Yeah.
So, you know, hopefully there's still a market for the small people that are doing things right.
The spices are really coming again, but real spices, not what you get in the supermarket. You know, when people buy saffron, and I tell them it takes like 80,000 flowers to make 1 ounce of saffron, you know, or vanilla pods take 2 years to grow and it's still hand-pollinated. It's sexy, it's still there, and you use that and you appreciate what you use. It's easier than pouring some ready-made sauce over some pasta. You know, you're making it from scratch. It's love, it's
from the heart.
Inspiring, and it's just, you know, the smell and the touch of it is just, you know.
Today, spice trails cover the world. Now, cumin from the Middle East is often associated with Mexico. while chilies from Mexico are now used more in places like India. Fennel seeds originally from southern Europe are used more often in China. Ginger from India is used copiously in Caribbean food, and turmeric from India is used a lot in the food of North Africa, while cinnamon from Sri Lanka is massive in Indonesia.
Fortunes have been made, empires been built, even a new world discovered through spice. Thousands of years of obsession with exotic aromas has caused men to pillage, plunder and explore the world. So next time you look at your spice rack, seeing those spices go stale, just think of the epic journey they took to get there.